tried to capture some of the details. I see Commissioner Osigura just joined us, so thank you. If anybody has any amendments to those meeting notes or has any questions or things you want to make sure get documented in the notes, now's the time to speak up. If you haven't had time to look at them, then that's fine. We could also put that off to the next meeting. I'd be fine with that. Commissioner Sky.
Thank you. I had a slight adjustment to the section that talked about my suggestion that we don't have amendments to documents be reviewed a second time. And instead of the two-time review set in place, the last part should say for commission policies, because I think that's what we had said, that if there are significant changes to policies, we would have a second reading of them. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that should apply to everything that we review or approve.
And that wasn't clear enough. Is there like I could send you the Word document and then you could just do a quick change, or do you have a specific language change you want us to just read into the record and then we can approve them from there?
Yeah, it's literally just the last word in that sentence. Instead of documents, it just should say policies.
Replace documents with policies. Okay. Are there any other proposed changes to the meeting minutes in the last meeting?
Yeah, Heidi, John. I didn't see any reference to the removing the language about sales tax. That I think Mr. Donlevy said he was just going to excise that sentence, but I haven't seen the final letter and I didn't see it in the minutes. I just wanted to confirm that as well.
I believe we did remove that language, Commissioner Donlevy, before we sent it, and we did post it right away. It should be in the Google document. I'm double checking now. And it is. I even started a folder just for the bottle bill letter and all the letters that are coming in support of that letter, so you could all see what we see.
Okay.
Yeah, it is there. Thank you. But we can add that discussion of the removing the language about the sales tax and using sales tax. Are there any other changes? If those are the only two changes, I would just ask that Commissioner Ward, well, actually, I could do this. I'll just take the meeting minutes after the meeting. I'll make those two changes. I'll confirm I got it right with Commissioner Sky and Commissioner Davis, and then we'll just post them from there if that's okay, if everybody's all right with that. Very good. Thumbs up. We got approval. Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've approved the meeting minutes with those two changes, and I'll follow up with Davis and Sky to make sure we get that right. Thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item number 3. Right on time, actually early. This is the 10 minutes we have for public comment review for items that are not on the agenda. And at this time, any member of the public can address the commission on matters that are not listed on this particular agenda. We are not allowed to really respond or debate to these because they're not on the agenda and people are not expecting us to discuss them. So I can ask Ben from CalRecycle, are there any public comments that we have in the queue to read?
Yes, there's one from Daniel Velazquez with NREP. It reads, 32 years ago, a movie scene envisioning the future with trash powering a time-travel DeLorean was released. The idea of the future was to use trash as a resource among flying cars. Now, advanced chemical recycling makes that future a reality. Plastics and tires are the only two types of waste that share the same component and source, hydrocarbons from oil and gas. No other waste shares the same structure. Therefore, should their treatment be different? Mechanical recycling cannot treat all the hydrocarbon structures waste due to several factors, such as technology limitations, contamination, additives, and chemical composition, etc. Advanced chemical recycling process, such as pyrolysis, gasification, and depolymerization, allow for the catalytic cracking of no-treated waste into hydrocarbons, naphtha, key feedstock to produce new building blocks for plastics, monomers, styrene, waxes, ultra-low sulfur fuels, and other petrochemicals that aim to create new products and new jobs. Moreover, ULSF can, and the rest of the comment is posted publicly.
Okay, thank you. And again, we're going to take up today, because we ran short of time, we tried to go to 2 hours and it was very difficult. We're going to take up an agenda item 6, the discussion again about advanced recycling, and we're going to have The two presenters who presented at the last meeting also available to answer questions live. And we're also going to hear a presentation from Julia Levin with the Bioenergy Association about advanced recycling and how that can be used for organics. So it's not just a plastics discussion. So we'll go ahead and thank you, Mr. Velasquez, for your comments. Are there any other comments?
That was the only one.
Great, thank you. Okay, then we'll go ahead and move on to agenda item number 4, which is committee reports on policy recommendations for commission discussion and possible approval. And I want to thank the committee chairs that uploaded your draft meeting minutes from your last meeting so that other commissioners could see what was happening with those committees. Commissioner Ward and I worked on the draft format for the committee chairs to actually do a written review, and between the bottle bill and potential press release, which I'll talk about, and some other things, it was more complicated than we thought. I'll just put it that way. And Commissioner Davis provided some feedback. We did upload his draft so you could see what that format might look like and give us any feedback on that. But there are a lot of things each committee has to do, and we want to make sure we get that right, because basically we're going to take this language and actually put some of it into the report, I think, to make sure it's very clear what we're all agreeing to deliver in July. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Davis, since he was able to give us our first feedback on those documents. And you can look at that if you like in the Google Doc while we discuss it. And then you can just give us a quick report out on what policies you're working on drafting and when you expect them to come to the commission. Commissioner Davis?
Yeah, if you have I have it on my screen if you want to see it while I'm talking it over, but it is in the Google Docs. So, yeah, so our focus has been largely around the requirements in the Public Resources Code related to the statewide market development plan. So the first 4 items are the relationship between policies that have already been adopted in the preliminary report and those 4 elements of the plan. A couple of the elements, increasing demand and, oops, my screen just changed, I can't see the report. Increasing market demand for materials and increasing demand for recycled content products were specifically addressed in the recommendations. There are other elements of the plan where there's actually, I think, other committees or commission recommendations, excuse me, address those elements. One is to promote efficient local waste diversion systems yielding high-quality industrial usable materials. This really has to do, I think, with collection and processing. So it's the organics and recycling committees will be taking a look at those recommendations as they come and may have comments. We had also began to look at EPR was one of our initial priorities, but the extended producer responsibility is now part of a subcommittee. So right now we're not specifically focused on this section of the PRC, but I think in order to report back, we'll try to link to the recommendations that are coming from the other committees or subcommittees as they're finally adopted, or provide any input that we can during the formation. And then the last one, promoting competitive collection and use of secondary waste materials. I think at the committee level, we've agreed that competitive really isn't the appropriate description, that we think efficient use of the resources is more appropriate. And we're looking at product reuse initially, but that's now part of a subcommittee. So, that may roll back to us. I think we're getting reports since one of our committee members is part of that subcommittee focused on reuse. And the main task going forward for us, and there's language in here that was provided to us on deadlines, and we put that first, what we're focusing on. But we're starting to look at a variety of specific product segments, I guess, or materials, kind of a broad focus on construction and demolition materials, including flooring, drywall, asphalt shingles, building material certification, glass recycling, particularly minimum content for bottles sold in California, and refillables, which are, I think, being covered, at least initially, by the recycling committee. We're also looking at textiles, diapers, and sanitary products, and some focus on, again, on general plan guidelines, trying to improve those. And third-party recycled content verification will be also one of our tasks. So we have some presentations lined up, but we don't yet have a schedule. I just received this and was able to turn it around yesterday. It came in earlier, but we're going to take this to the full committee and try to get an idea of when we expect to be able to bring policies. We're pretty far along on 2 or 3 of the lists. So anyway, that's the way this looks at, or the form looks coming back from market development.
Okay. Well, thanks. And we can refine this form. I mean, the key thing is for the commission is to make sure we know what policies are coming, when they're coming, so we can do a better job of scheduling and pacing things as we go into the July report, and making sure we don't get, everything all at the same time and it gets to be a scramble. So if you want to fill out the top part or change things for the committee chairs, feel free. We just want to make sure that everybody's aligned on which committee is doing what mandate that we have and when we expect to get it delivered to the committee or commission for review and discussion, so we have time to do it all. Are there any questions for Commissioner Davis? It looks like Commissioner Ward, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, very briefly. Our intent on trying to put this format together was to try to make it easier for the committees to report back in a time-efficient manner to focus on what it is they're working on and how that affects the larger commission. I think really appreciate Commissioner Davis' review of this, and he already highlighted some of the reasons why we want to refine the language on the legislative tasks being addressed by each of the committees, which is it's not always clear. Sometimes there's overlap, and specifically there's things that we're asked to do that maybe the committee thinks a different response is appropriate, such as your suggested change of language. So by listing out all of the things we're asked to do, then it makes it a little bit clearer what the best response is. And then, of course, we do want to record which commissioner is working on which topic area, because if you're not on that committee, then you otherwise might not know. So that's the intent. And as Chair Sanborn said, what we're trying to do on the opening section about the legislative mandates is craft language that might be easily dropped into the report so that we can explain clearly what each committee was setting out to do.
Great, thank you. All right, so if there's no other comments or questions on the Market Development Committee, we can go ahead and move on to, why don't we go ahead and go to the Labeling and Media Committee with Commissioner Dell. Did you want to report out what committee's working on?
Yeah, so this is quite simple. So I'd like to do the report of where our committee is on the 4 main tasks we had, and then actually take a tiny bit of time and pose a question to the commission. So quickly on the report, on our 4 tasks, our top task is an overarching continuous task, which is to engage with CalRecycle on their new education program. And we continue to do that in each meeting. In our last commission meeting, the OPA group talked about how they would come out and survey the commission. So we get a green check on that, but it's a continuing task. That task actually wouldn't become a policy recommendation. Second task that we get a green check on is working with the recycling committee to identify the worst forms of contamination and make a policy recommendation to help address that. And we did that in the preliminary report. And actually, I think one of the policies is the proposed legislation number 8, SB 343, might actually be taking that up, which is great. So that one gets a green check. The third task was to similarly work with the Organics Committee and identify, is there a policy recommendation we could make around a label that would help reduce contamination in organic streams? And Commissioner Sky is on our committee, and he's also on the Organics Committee. And in our last meeting, he assured us that their 2 policy recommendations around precautionary principle and their other one around labeling actually address that. So while we don't get a green check, that task has been checked off. Now, the fourth task is the big, hardest, overarching task, which continues to sort of grow, and we're taking our time with. And that is actually to propose an overall comprehensive labeling system for products, acceptance lists, bins. It's moved beyond simply curbside stuff to look at how should hazardous things be labeled. What about reuse? How do you, what's the definition of reuse? And so that our committee continues to work on. We have our next meeting scheduled on March 4th, where we'll also be inviting some jurisdictions to come and talk to us about what they're seeing in labeling problems, specifically around organics. That's a big issue. But that policy recommendation, which is overarching, we'll continue to work on, and of course, with the due date of having it back to the commission in time to really think about it, and bring, because it's multifaceted and it flanges up to other things to evolve it, and definitely by the July report, be able to have a policy recommendation that shows us overall structure. Any questions on that before I pose my question to the commission?
I don't see any in the chat. So why don't you go ahead and,
Ted, Commissioner Ward's waving.
Thank you. Yeah, I have just want to express some concern about the potential labeling as things as reusable. Certainly, we're all very aware of the durability of plastics packaging and the potential reuse of those yogurt containers to store other food and things in our refrigerators. My concern is that there will be then a inadvertent push to call all of these durable products packaging reusable, because they could potentially be partially reused for some period of time. And I just want to express very broad caution on that front. Just like, you know, lightweighting or reducing use of materials can be a general positive, but if you're lightweighting too much, then that can actually increase recycling costs. Similarly, calling things reusable so that they just become durable items that still don't have an actual recycling home isn't necessarily a step forward.
Well, that's great. That's great you bring that up, Commissioner Ward, because I believe actually you and Commissioner Schneider are the little committee that's working on reusables right now. So,
right.
So this is where we actually flange up to you to get you to help
exactly.
define.
So that's why I wanted to voice
lead.
that for the whole committee.
Yeah. So that's why. So there's reusables there and there's organics there. So we're really, you know, connecting into progress made by other full committees, as well as the little two people initiatives on a range of things. So yes, you have the pen on that.
great. And this is why we talk about these things, just to make sure we're all connecting and coordinating. So
Did I see Commissioner Valle had a star?
I do. Thank you, Commissioner Dell. Is your committee talking about one-time use products? PET plastic bottles, for example. We're averaging 3 to 5 tons a day of PET plastics, and even though they find a home, they're only about 7 cents a pound in terms of the value to us as a commodity to sell. Yeah. So, and people continually they don't reuse those. They throw them away and use them once. Is your committee looking at that?
That is the recycling committee around that goes to the recycling committee, or it would be end markets. Right. If the value is not high enough, we're really around labeling things and media and education and outreach.
Okay, I appreciate that, and that's a conversation that Jeff and I have had before. And it's a very delicate conversation, as you know. There are other substitute containers that can be reused several times, such as the aluminum can. And I went to a winery in Napa. They're serving bottled water in aluminum cans with aluminum caps. And you can reuse those and you can recycle those, but they're not being sold on the open market. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, who's next in the chat? Commissioner Davis.
Yeah, just to follow on quickly on the reusables for Mr. Ward's question, there is a new French law requiring labeling for repair, and I think that is something that I intend to kind of push through the labeling process. It's specific. I know you've been talking about right to repair. This will help with that process, but so it is related to reuse. In fact, it applies to appliances, smartphones, laptops, variety of devices, and we may recommend going forward further with it as we discussed. But those are really the durable items that are more reusable and not, you can reuse a yogurt container from splits, but I don't think that's the focus.
Right. And just so that I have my connection lined up, the people who are looking at the labels around right to repair, who's on the lead on that? Is that Commissioner Davis? Was that you? With Commissioner Ward?
Yes.
Okay. So Commissioner Ward, you're triangulated in two ways into the network of this overall system. So when you ask me what progress is being made, I'm going to ask you what progress is being made.
Okay, so
Right
I
to
just
repair is
I want
Right.
to clarify this. So right to repair, we've already put into the first draft report. And so are we talking about updating that to have a labeling component?
What I heard Commissioner Dell say was that essentially she's looking to see what the Schneider and I recommend regarding any labeling regarding that's what I understand. That
Yeah,
But then,
Commissioner Schneider and I have not reached any conclusion on that.
okay, so we're
And
expecting.
then also labeling around right to repair. That wasn't addressed in the first policy.
Not at all. There was
Right.
no, well,
So
and
there's
first of
two.
all, the right to repair was a recommendation, and to my knowledge, there is not currently a legislative vehicle. So that's not, it's, while it's a policy recommendation, it's not current.
Well, they have until
existence.
Friday.
Okay.
We can still
But-
help.
So excellent.
Let me
It's-
summarize them, because I want to be clear on this. So Commissioner Davis brought up labeling, the right to repair and the labeling part. And you're bringing that to the labeling committee, but that's one person. And then we have Commissioners Ward and Ann Schneider working on the right or the reuse section. And to me, there's an it's not really overlap because reuse is different than the right to repair. So I guess we'll just let Commissioner Davis run with the right to repair labeling.
Yeah, if I could, let me just clarify. The right to repair is that legislative package. Repairing something that, that can be repaired doesn't require legislation if there's proper labeling. And so it'll come clear as we bring it forward, but not to conflate the two. And it was really in response to comments received by the committee that we took this on a couple of meetings ago. So it was in response to some pretty specific comments from Peter Moon that I researched. So it's really just providing repair information or a link to repair information for devices that can be repaired.
I just want to clarify that you're the only one working on this to develop the policy that would come to the labeling committee, as far as I understand. We're not starting another two-person committee.
No,
Okay.
Okay.
No,
Just to
Okay, great.
okay, very good. Perfect.
All right, that's all clear. That's all good. So now I'd like to pose a question to the commission, and that is, my volunteers and I spend a lot of time looking on store shelves on labels because we're in the pursuit of facts over fiction to really get the right labels on products that are recyclable, compostable. Those are our two top focus. And unfortunately, what we're seeing on California shelves, and as well as what people receive right now, are labels that are not legal by existing law. I'll give you first example. My mom's friend got some food delivered thing from Freshly. It's filled with gunk. It says recyclable. This came into a California household. I don't believe that that's based on my understanding of California law, which relates to the FTC Green Guides. I don't think that's legal now. Second one, Walmart's now selling millions of solar lights with big recycle symbols on them. If you put on 2 pairs of glasses, you can read, it says something that says, please recycle or dispose of properly. But it's this long, it's hard plastic, it's different types of plastic. What you see is a big recycle label and teeny tiny letters around what type of battery it is. So they're actually implying you should recycle the battery. But a consumer looks at that and sees a predominant recycle symbol. So word of warning to MRFs, these are headed your way, and these are hard plastic and 1 foot long. So I've done a little research and asked around, and there's no example of either the California Attorney General or any district attorneys actually ever filing suit or trying to get these fixed. And actually at the FTC, at the Green Guides, the federal level, same thing. It just hasn't been monitored. So we've got laws with no monitoring and enforcement. So just like if for speeding laws, you know, if cops were out there with radar guns, everybody would go really fast, right? And so this is a real gap. And now it's wonderful. We're even proposing more laws like a SB 343 to make the labeling laws even better. But if there's no enforcement, how will it get better? And so my question to the commission, and yes, we can take this back to our committee to discuss, is there any recommendation that we can make as a commission around filling that gap? Yes, the Attorney General of the of California has a lot of important things, probably higher priorities than this on their list, as do the district attorneys. But so what could we as the commission or CalRecycle do to help actually enforce the laws so that the improper recycle symbols aren't there? I don't think it's right that Greenpeace actually has to file a lawsuit, right? I don't think we should have to rely on NGOs like the Last Beach Cleanup to file a lawsuit. So I'm posing this as an open question. What can we do to improve enforcement?
Commissioner Toyota, did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, if I remember, we talked about this a little bit in the labeling committee, and I thought that what we decided was that what could be labeled recyclable would be what is on that state list, and that we would include in that policy recommendation that the recycling symbol cannot be on anything else. And that would be a way of fixing this issue, is making that part of that policy. If it's labeled recyclable, it has to be recyclable, or it cannot have a symbol like that or anything like it or anything misleading.
And I agree with that, but there's actually laws right now that say they can't do the please recycle, but no one's enforcing them. So we can have a beautiful law, but if there's no enforcement of it, it won't get better. So it's the enforcement aspect.
Commissioner Lapis?
Thanks for raising that, Jan. I agree with you in terms of the interpretation of what the law says, but I don't think it is quite as clear-cut as the Allen bill will make it. So I think please recycle right now is sort of in a bit of a gray area where I agree with your interpretation, but I don't think any court or enforcement agency has agreed with that yet. And so the Allen bill, which basically does what Sarah brought up, would make that a lot clearer. More broadly than that, I think looking at how do we increase enforcement, and this might go across various recommendations, something that is definitely worth discussing. I've been thinking, does it make sense to have some kind of solid waste enforcement unit within the Attorney General's office that could apply to labeling, but also things like illegal land application and illegal dumping and other things in that category. It's not a very well thought out idea, but I'd gladly work with somebody on trying to flesh it out a little bit, and I'm not sure what committee you would go to.
Thank you. And Commissioner Ward, did you want to speak to this too?
Yes, I really appreciate Commissioner Dell bringing up the enforcement problem, and I think it is a big challenge. But to me, one of the things you want to do is you want to get as close to how do you get into the product manufacturer's head, understanding that they're international in nature and that they're looking to market in California and they have their limited information. You get so that they don't make these stupid mistakes on an ongoing basis, and you're not building up a huge department to try to look through store shelves and find, how do you make this enforcement efficient is just a central question. But to me, it really comes down to what is the closest way you can get into a product manufacturer's head that this is a constraint upon how they design and build product. And so that calls to training, it calls to certification, and it also calls to enforcement, but enforcement really under trade organization kind of groups where you have certain performance standards. If you're going to design products for the market, you need to be able to meet these standards and understand the constraints in which you're operating. And we have a lot of steps to build to that point, but at this point we have a lot of pieces that are totally missing, such as the training, such as the certification, such as the basics of how do you manage materials in their production so that they're recoverable at the end.
Okay.
Well, right now, looking at other products, like how do you label vanilla? Can you put sawdust and Parmesan cheese? These kind of product labeling. I watched the court cases that come through. Unfortunately, what it's taking is lawsuits, and I don't think that's the right way to go. Everyone makes fun of America or California of how many lawyers we have. I don't think lawyers should be our monitors, and right now, that's all the product companies are listening to, or too many of them. So thank you for letting me raise it, Commissioner Lapis. If you want to take this on, I volunteer to work with you on it. Obviously, you can tell I care about it. But I have to raise it as an issue because we're talking about all these labeling, we're putting all this effort into it. But if there's no enforcement, then honestly, what's the point?
Here's my suggestion. I think everybody agrees we've got a discussion that should be had in the next report on enforcement. We all know that laws without enforcement are not going to work. That's been proven over and over again, and this is a great example of it. And how would that apply across everything that we're doing? Because as Commissioner Lapis brought up, this is a big issue with illegal dumping right now. We're talking about statewide. There is really no place to go when there's all this illegal dumping happening and there's no permit for the small haulers, et cetera. So anyway, I would suggest that Commissioners Dell and Lapis work together on some language about the importance that any bill have a strong enforcement and a funded enforcement program. And then we can get into specifics if we think we have some ideas or suggestions in that final report about what that might look like. And you can, dig in with the AG's office and with others, just CalRecycle staff, if you want to gather more data on what that could look like to ensure that there is oversight of this entire industry and all the rules that we have that aren't being enforced. And that's resulting in a lot of problems. So are you okay with that, Commissioners Dell and Lapis? So we have a new 2-person group working on this. And then to me, that would be...
Can I ask a quick logistical question? So we would be working on this for the full commission?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. So I would suggest that you two come up with a policy proposal or some language you'd like us to all look at, and this could come right straight to the commission because it kind of goes across different committees, if that's okay with the other commissioners. Okay, because to me, enforcement is absolutely key or else it doesn't work. All right, good. So we have a new 2-person commission, not that we needed another one, but we kind of do. And this will be on enforcement, so it'll be Lapis and Dell. And just ask that, hopefully we can get moving on that pretty quickly because again, I'm starting to worry about in the 3 months period how many proposals come at the very last minute for the report.
To clarify, that's enforcement and illegal dumping?
Well, enforcement of X could be illegal dumping, could be the labeling, could be many other things that we're proposing. But generally, it's a big discussion about making sure that policies have enforcement, that the enforcement is funded, and that it's effective. Otherwise,
Right.
It doesn't work.
I totally agree. And I think the accumulation of detritus along the roadsides is an ongoing testimony to the failure of our systems. That
Yep.
needs to be incorporated and addressed.
Which is a massive pollution problem and a really bad water quality problem. In fact, Caltrans is getting a lot of fines and issues because the runoff from our roadways is just so much plastic and so much pollution from dumping and illegal disposal. Okay, very good. That was excellent. So we'll go on next. We've got just a few minutes left and we need to get reports out from several committees still. So we'll go ahead and turn our attention to, how about the Recycling Committee and Commissioner Dunleavy? Surprise.
Okay, good morning. All right, outstanding for us for the final report, we have the what is recyclable list. I think we need to flesh out the matrix a little bit more so everybody can easily understand that. And then with Commissioner Lapis, just defining a little bit more the pathway to get onto the list. So what products would need to do. So I think those two tasks are what we have to just clean up to get into the final report.
Okay, now I think there was something that we were going to have you at the committee work on, and that I think out of the last bottle bill discussion, it was the tiered permitting and making sure that gets on the next agenda or upcoming agenda. Commissioner Lapis, I know, really wanted to get that discussed, or the tiered funding mechanism.
Processing payments.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah, no
coming up.
progress on that at this point.
When do you plan to have that scheduled? If it's not the next meeting, soon thereafter, because I know it was important to Commissioner Lapis.
Yeah, just waiting to hear from CAW on the concept, and we haven't heard. Definitely interested. It's something that I think that the Recycling Committee should hear, but I don't think we'll schedule it until we've had a chance to kind of review and understand what they're presenting.
Yeah, and I would just say to Commissioner Lapis, I think the reason we took so long at the last meeting on this was because we really didn't have anything in front of us and we really didn't know what the full impacts of this would be. So the sooner you put pen to paper on the proposal and what the intended goal is and what potential unintended consequences could arise, that would help the commissioners to move this through, I think, a lot faster because we just don't understand enough about the proposal to know.
Yeah, who it helps, who it hurts.
Yeah, right. And that's what we want with all of these, to make sure we fully grapple with all of that. Okay. And then, so I do want to say, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, that I did upload a model policy recommendation to the Google Doc that anybody could fill out and choose to submit a policy recommendation to a committee chair, to a commissioner to bring up at, if we decided that was an important policy proposal. So I just wanted to let the committee chairs and all the commissioners know, we had one example where somebody was saying, hey, hurry up on this. Why isn't the commission moving on this? And I said, here's the format. It would help us a lot. We're a volunteer commission. If you fill that out and then you tell us what you think this policy should be. And that seems to be working. So if you would like to use that, please feel free to let people know, and anybody who's watching, you can download that policy recommendation form, fill it out, and submit it to a commissioner or to the vice chair and I, and we'll go ahead and discuss it and decide if it gets on one of the committee agendas, et cetera. Okay, so we can move on next to the, let's see.
Can I make a comment? I had an asterisk.
Sure. Oh, sure. Sorry. Go ahead.
So my comment is actually on the first item Jeff mentioned, which is the what is recyclable list. I think the couple stumbling blocks we've hit when we've discussed this before, both as a group and as a committee, has been, making sure that all the data is accurate, because some of the manufacturers said that, some of our information is inaccurate. So making sure all that is up to date and accurate. And then, I think the big stumbling block is how we handle polypropylene and PET thermoforms. And so I think it's something that we as a group need to discuss and make decisions on. I'm not sure it makes sense for any two people to write a recommendation necessarily, but maybe we could write up a few different options and have that as an agenda item coming up. And yeah, it's a decision we're gonna have to make. We can't keep kicking that can down the road.
Well, I would propose that's really in the realm of the recycling committee members. So maybe to get on the agenda, a discussion about options, because I agree that's kind of been left hanging. And we've heard from a lot of people that it's sending the wrong signal to the industry that they're not going to be considered, and welcome Commissioner Schneider, they're not going to be considered. Recyclable is going to really put them in a bind at trying to develop the market. So I think, I don't know, Commissioner Don Levy, is that something that we can get on the agenda at the committee level?
We could, but I think we've already reviewed it. I think for thermoforms, well, let me back up. With the data, definitely make sure that it's accurate and people understand it. So if an item is not deemed to be recyclable, it's pretty clear to everybody. As an example with thermoforms, I think people would agree that it's an item that can be recycled, but it doesn't meet the criteria because the material is not being separated by most of the MRFs. I think it might be 10 to 15 that are actually doing a separation on it. The rest is being mixed in with PET bottles. So it's going for secondary processing, and what happens with the material, it's kind of unknown. So I don't think thermoforms are close to getting on the list.
Jeff, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this wasn't agendized, so we probably shouldn't get into the weeds beyond scheduling a process.
Right.
We could do it at the recycling committee, but I feel like everyone in the commission wants to weigh in on this item. And
I think we just need to
talked
figure
about
out
it repeatedly in the recycling commission or committee. Sorry.
Okay, I'll let Vice Chair Valle go first, and then we'll wrap this up as we're going to move on.
As I mentioned earlier, this is just a general statement about the one-time use of plastics. And then we can probably schedule this for a discussion in the future. It's becoming eminently clear to me that there's no future in the use of one-time plastics, even if they are recyclable, and even if there are nominal markets for those products. I think on a broader view, as a commission, we should take a position that while things are recyclable, the question is, are they sustainable, and are they sustainable in terms of the planet Earth? And is it in our best interest to take a position, state a position on those commodities or those products? So I'll bring this up at a future recycling committee meeting. Thank you.
Okay, so the overall environmental impact, whether it's recyclable or not, is a discussion we could have in the final report. It's a great point. And then Commissioner Dell.
Right, just to give a counterbalance on this market signals idea, the thing is, what is recyclable in California today has processing capacity. Someone's buying it, it's getting reprocessed. So when the producers want to recycle something, they can make the investment, make a commitment to MRFs to buy it, and that'll be the market signal that MRFs should collect it and they have someone to sell it to. There's an old chicken and egg argument that continually comes up. If you collect it, we'll finally build a processing plant. Well, that is a failed scheme. 20 years later, we've been hearing that on a lot of items that haven't happened. So I say the ultimate market signal is when the producers actually pay for a processing plant and guarantee buying whatever it is that they want to call recyclable.
Okay. So with that, we're going to have to wrap this up because we've got speakers waiting that wanted to present to us. So I would just say that sounds like we have to have a discussion about this further. So we're going to about overall sustainability, and actually Commissioner Ward and I are working on something related to that, which is economics and the fundamental underpinnings of our entire economy that have driven us to basically pillage people and planet for profit. And we're going to be discussing that and bringing that back. Have to figure out probably Market Development Committee because it's about markets probably mostly. And very quickly, we'll turn it over to Commissioner Potashner to give a quick update on organics. We're going to have to forgo
I'll make it super quick. So our next meeting is March 9th. We have a few outstanding data requests to Cal Recycle that they're going to report on related to 1383 capacity, what's in the pipeline, what's been developed. We'll have local government, either League of Cities, CSEC, or RCRC report out on what their progress has been when it comes to meeting 1383 and what the outstanding hurdles are. So that'll be our March 9th hearing.
Okay, so we'll be able to define compostable by the end of...
Oh, the other thing, I believe today a compostable labeling bill will be introduced that mirrors our policy. I think it was 17 or 19. I forget which number is in front of me right now. So that'll get introduced today in the legislature.
Fantastic. There's lots of news on that front. So we'll hear from Mindy in a few. Thank you for that report. And with that, we'll go ahead and move on time to agenda item number 5. We gave an hour to this so that we had time to discuss it. And this was really at the request of Commissioner Potashner that we look at the use of taxes and subsidies to support recycling and market development and drive all the things that we want to drive to get to a circular economy. And at the discussion of the commission, we did invite real experts to speak to us on this from Eunomia Consultancy Group, Sarah Edwards and Joe Papaneschi. So I want to welcome Sarah and Joe. Thank you very much for being here. And I pushed them hard this morning to get me the PowerPoint, so I was able to upload it to our Google document so everybody who's watching can actually follow along if it's easier to use it that way instead of seeing the little one that'll end up on the screen. So with that, I'll turn it over to both of you unless we wanted to have Commissioner Potashner provide any more context before we let them get started.
No, I'll just get in the way. So let's let them start.
I'm sure you would have, but that's okay. All right, very good. Just want to make sure you have the opportunity. So we'll turn it over to Joe and Sarah and Chris, I guess, as well, Chris Sherrington. So thank you again and welcome to the Recycling Commission meeting.
Yeah, thanks Heidi, and thanks for inviting us to speak. We're going to be doing a bit of a tag team. I've got the easy job of just introducing Eunomia in a few simple slides, and then I'm going to hand over to Joe and Chris to do the bulk of the talking. So just to introduce myself, I'm Sarah Edwards. I oversee Eunomia Research and Consulting's activities in North America, which includes some of the great stuff that we've been doing in the US, but also in Canada. I'll let Joe and Chris introduce themselves when they kick in. So just a little bit about Eunomia, I suppose. We're an independent consultancy that's been working in the waste resource management and circular economy space for 20 years. You can see here on the map just the location of some of our offices. So predominantly a large amount of our work is done in Europe from our UK offices and Belgium office. But 4 years ago, we opened an office in New York to service the North American market. And our team of over 120 consultants includes people that have hands-on experience collecting municipal waste from municipalities, as well as working with policymakers to design the best policy strategy. So we really do kind of span the whole gambit of kind of waste management and resource management, and that's kind of led us to be one of the leaders in both policy and the circular economy. Thanks, Joe. And this is really just a quick overview of some of our clients. So we work across the sphere. So from everything working with, like some of the big brands like Red Bull and Coca-Cola, and some of the big packaging manufacturers like Ball Packaging, to some of the really leading NGOs, including WWF, as well as organisations such as the European Commission and some of the states. So we've recently just finished a big plastic piece for Department of Ecology in Washington, looking at the cost and benefits of different policies around plastics there. So, traditionally we've been looking more at the municipality work, but that's spread as more people become interested really in waste management. and these are some of the projects that we've worked on. There's, there's obviously thousands, but in 2019, we actually did a review of the deposit system, which was a policy review looking at kind of some of the issues around the rather complicated policy that is the beverage container piece there, and making some recommendations that I think hopefully will be passed through into some future bills. As I said, we just finished a piece of work, which was a very detailed piece of work in Washington State that was looking at the costs and benefits of running an EPR program alongside a DRS. And as part of that, we modeled 8 different collection and processing systems to see what the actual cost would be and what the performance benefits in terms of a circular economy. And then for my European comrades here, they've been working on, designing the guidance for the European Commission on extended producer responsibility, looking at various the role of chemical recycling, for instance, in a holistic and high-performing recycling system. So just a kind of large number of very important and, I suppose, pivotal pieces of work on both sides of the pond. So with that, I'll hand over to Joe, and he'll give you an introduction to kind of the topic we've been asked to speak on today.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'm going to start with contextualizing what we're going to show you on the potential policy instruments. I'm just going to try and work out how to stop you all being visible while I'm trying to present. That's better. And really what we're going to focus here on the role of recycling in the circular economy. And particularly when we talk about recycling, we're talking about, recycling actually happening. When do we get benefit from all of this effort on collection and sorting and all of the kind of operational and policy and enforcement stuff we need to do? And the context for that is, I'm really sorry about this, the window with, let's see if I can really get rid of you this time. Are you still seeing the slides? Yeah. Okay, that's the sort of top level context for this obviously is the focus on addressing the climate emergency. And you can see here, this is just showing that actually, we know we've got this 50 billion ton a year roughly emissions issue we need to address to get to net zero. Half of that is sort of stuff we're addressing around the energy system, and the other half is materials and food. And a large part of that ends up eventually in municipal waste. And so you can see here, this is, again, a sort of global picture, but we're talking about a magnitude where certainly by 2030, we're going to be looking at 5 to 7 billion of those tons of emissions being driven by the products which ultimately become municipal waste. And our sort of analysis at a global level is saying that we can get something between 2.5 and 3 billion of those emissions reduced simply by implementing the recycling part of the circular economy based on technology and systems that are well understood. So how do we get there? I think in terms of the kind of what's really driving those outcomes, obviously it's the fact that we know that use of secondary resources has emits significantly less CO2, uses less energy, and has many other reduced environmental impacts. And I want to just quickly, this is going to be really difficult with my, let's see if I'm just going to try hide all webcams, see if that works. Yeah, this could be good now. I'm just going to explain this chart quickly to contextualize why we think really delivering high recycling performance is a big part of how we're going to address resource efficiency and creating a sort of genuinely circular economy. And I'm just going to run through a quick animation to explain this chart, and I'll come back to it in a moment. So imagine we have 100 units of a product we're making from virgin raw materials, and we hit a pretty decent recycling rate, collection rate of 70%. And these materials are made out of pretty recyclable things, so we actually yield 95% of that 70% into new products. And so going back to our chart, I'm just going to build this part of the chart up. That means of that original 100 units, we get 67 new units of new product made from that original 100 units worth of material. And we repeat that cycle, and we get an additional 44 units. We repeat it again, we get 29, we repeat it again, we get another 20, then 13, then 9, etc. To the point where the losses that we incur during all of those processes lead us to running out of material. And so at a point you say, well, there's nothing useful left here. And at that 70% collection rate, we've got 199 additional units of product out of that original 100 units. So we've sort of got a 3-to-1 ratio overall. And if you have lower recycling rates, obviously you get fewer units. But something pretty interesting happens when you start hitting really high recycling rates. And that is essentially as you edge towards 100%, you get this kind of exponential curve that means that, for instance, at a 95% collection rate, so the kind of thing you would get from a very high-performing deposit scheme for beverage packaging, with a 95% yield, so something like your metal packaging, you would be getting 900, so a 10-to-1 ratio of new product for original product. And obviously, if you have lower yields, then that impact, that benefit gets depressed. And that is really sort of telling us, high quality recycling, certainly different materials performing in different ways, and going about this in a way that minimizes losses throughout the process is going to be very important to how much cumulative benefit we actually get from all this effort. And you can see that the action is really happening at this kind of 80% collection rate plus. So, that if we're sort of thinking about, well, how do we get recycling to really play its part in a resource efficient economy, that's the kind of level we need to be aiming for, and we need to be making the economy deliver for us. And in terms of how we get there, we've got a pretty good understanding of the kinds of things we need to do on the ground. We need to have very good separate collection systems. We need to use incentives to drive consumer behavior and business behavior like deposit systems. We need to leave nothing behind in terms of the system having gaps in it. We need to even look at sorting and extracting value from mixed waste. And we need to then be thinking about how we get the most beneficial uses out of those materials that we're sending back into the economy. And so what we're going to spend most of the time talking about today is the instruments that you can use to drive that. And we're going to really focus on 4 sort of categories that we've been doing a lot of work on, primarily in Europe. But actually, this kind of package we're going to show you today, you couldn't do this in Europe. In theory, California is in a better position to do this than we are, despite the fact that in many ways there's, North America does have a lot to learn from what's happening in Europe on circular economy at the moment. And so we're going to touch on all of these, probably majoring on taxes and EPR, but also how you would support those with other instruments like bans and charges to give you a holistic approach overall. And I'm going to hand over to Chris to take you through most of this. Chris is our Head of Policy and Economics and has been at the forefront of a lot of this work for us recently. Great, thanks, Joe. So I'm just going to set the scene with sort of the wider context for environmental taxation more generally. So the rationale here is that many activities impose costs on society. So these are costs that are often uncompensated. So when they're uncompensated, they're known as externalities. And the application of taxes on those activities can do what economists call internalizing these costs. So what this does, it makes the polluter pay for the damage. So it's in line with the polluter pays principle. And it can also incentivize behavior change. Ideally, not just internalizing the cost, you're trying to encourage less of the thing that you don't want. So the application of taxes also raises revenue, which is a really important aspect. There's an interesting trade-off between the effect of the tax in changing behaviour and the ability to raise revenue. If the response is greater than you anticipate, the revenue might be less, and we'll touch on this a bit later. But what this does create the opportunity to do is apply an approach called environmental fiscal reform. So shifting the burden of taxation away from the things you want more of, like jobs, onto things you want less of, like pollution. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind that if we can shift that burden, it should bring benefits across the board. So next slide, please, Joe. Thank you. So in the context of the circular economy, one tool that shows particular potential is material taxation. So here you'd want to reflect the external costs associated with the use of primary resources, but also secondary resources. Really, you want to tackle both because you're then providing a consistent incentive for waste prevention, not just a shift to secondary, although that's better than the use of primary. So you have this overall incentive for waste prevention, but that shift towards secondary and away from primary. At the moment, it's well understood by the OECD and others that we have a lot of perverse incentives. We have almost the opposite of environmental taxation. We have subsidies, environmentally harmful subsidies, as they're known, to the tune of billions each year globally. So part of this wider environmental fiscal reform is getting rid of these environmentally harmful subsidies and trying to get the cost right. So trying to internalize these external costs as far as possible. So next slide, please, Joe. So there's an example here in the UK of the landfill tax, which I think from the UK perspective was the first explicitly environmental tax, where the intention was, at least at the outset, to seek to internalise these external costs. So the landfill tax started off doing that. The level of the tax was set at £7 per tonne for active waste, so that's all waste that's not inert. So with the potential to biodegrade. So it was set at that in 1996 when it was introduced. This instrument then changed in nature. Rather than just seeking to internalise the costs, it changed into an instrument that set out, it ended up transforming the waste market and effectively creating a lot of the recycling infrastructure, or justifying the creation of the recycling infrastructure in the UK. So the tax itself became a driver of change, and a key element of this was the introduction of the escalator. So from 1999, the government made clear that it would go up by £1 per tonne every year. So that's giving the market that clear signal that this change is coming, the direction of travel is clear. Then got a bit more serious about it in 2005, where the escalator was increased by £3 per tonne per year. In 2007, the rate of increase was extended even further to £8 per tonne per year. So this certainty for the market gave investors the confidence that this incentive will be there for the long term, and let them understand it gave them confidence to invest in alternatives. So here we can see the purple line is the level of the tax. This chart ends in 2012, 2013. The tax has continued to increase. It's about £94 per tonne. At the moment, it's just increasing in line with inflation. But you can see the local authority collected and non-local authority collected waste, the red and the green, both decline, and the sum of the overall total is the blue line. So the effect here is pretty clear. So next slide, please, Joe. So in terms of the wider waste hierarchy, what the landfill tax does is it drives waste away from landfill. So there's then a question of where does that waste go? And to a large extent, it depends on what other instruments are in place. In the UK, a fair amount has gone, of the residual fraction has gone to energy recovery, so incineration. We don't have a tax on incineration in the UK. There are increasing calls for this because, again, there's environmental externalities that are not included in the cost. The other factor driving where the waste goes is the recycling targets. The recycling targets have effectively, they've been supported by the landfill tax. But waste prevention is top of the hierarchy. So what does landfill tax do for waste prevention? On its own, not a lot. So can we go to the next slide, please, Joe? So at the household level, the effect, certainly in the UK, of the landfill tax is pretty blunt. I've put in place an electricity meter as the image here because it strikes me that you'd never pay a flat rate for electricity consumption, based on the average consumption in your municipality. But this is actually what we do with waste. So there's no incentive at the margin for the householder to reduce waste unless it's reflected in their charges. So to help bring some of that incentive up to the level of the householder, a number of jurisdictions have implemented direct and variable rate charging, which is also known as pay-as-you-throw. So there's a number of different ways in which this is done. Oh, so you just go back, Joe. It can be based on weight, volume, frequency, or a combination of the above. Next slide. Something gone slightly wrong with the diagram there, so probably worth finishing it to the end. So this is an example from Schweinfurt in Germany, where you can see you've got the residual waste fraction in the dark blue and the separately collected fraction in the light blue. The scheme was introduced in 2000 and there's a fairly notable reduction. So there's a number of things to consider if you're looking at pay-as-you-throw. One of them relates back to the point I mentioned earlier about the response to the tax. And if the response is greater than you might think, the revenues are lower. So an issue that has been the case with pay-as-you-throw is if the variable element of the charge accounts for too much of the overall costs. If people respond more than expected, there's a challenge of a lack of revenue there. So you need to make sure that the fixed element is sufficient to cover sort of the basic costs of collection, and you vary the variable element is large enough to provide incentive, but not too large or not so large that it would potentially affect the viability of the system. So a big part of this reduction here was actually with garden waste, so a lot of home composting that went on. And there's a number of factors to consider around pay-as-you-throw in terms of what incentives it might create for people to behave in ways you wouldn't want them to behave. But there's also a lot of good examples of this being done quite well. Okay, next slide, please, Jack. Has that changed for you, Joe? It's not changed for me. It has. I'll try again. Does that work now?
Well,
do, I'll minimize the screen and then refresh the screen. No, it's still on the same diagram. Can I check, is everyone else seeing the... That's right. Yeah, that works for me now.
We're seeing the screen with the meter.
Yeah, that's right. So it's gone to the next one of those. So in its favour, direct and variable charging can be, it's fair, effectively, because you pay based on the amount that you, the waste that you generate. There are some potential distributional issues, maybe poorer households with larger families, but they can be addressed within the system. You might have a certain amount you can of waste that you can put out for free, and then the variable element kicks in above that. So the householders respond by preventing waste, and the fee for the residual waste should be set higher than that for recycling. So you're driving people to make sure they separate materials, but not too much that they put stuff that shouldn't be in the recycling. What it does for the municipality is, particularly where the marginal costs of residual waste treatment are high, it saves money. So this is where the landfill tax, which if it has the effect on the authority, on the municipality, they can pass that incentive through to the householder. And another important thing it does is it moves closer to people paying as consumers rather than citizens. So this is something that I've noticed, and I'm not the only one, but the term citizens and consumers almost always conflated. People see them as one and the same thing. Consumers are very different from citizens. You can be a citizen without consuming. You can be a consumer and consume a little, or consume a lot. So I think an important element of the polluter pays principle is to move more towards paying as consumers than as citizens.
So Sherrington, I just want to add to that the terms we often use are socialized costs, and as citizens, basically we're socializing the costs in garbage rates or landfill, because we're not paying one for one, like if it was an EPR system where the cost of the recycling was in the cost of the product. The person who bought the product is paying the full life cycle cost. If it's done at the back end, it's socialized across the entire community, and that is
It is. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's effective. As in the next slide, we're going to be coming on to talk about EPR, and in the absence of EPR, effectively the situation you have is one of corporate welfare, where the right price is not being paid. So next slide, please, Joe. So I'm going to just quickly introduce us to EPR, and what we're talking about here is EPR through the lens of the European Union. So what I'm presenting here is effectively the mandatory structure for EPR schemes. I'm going to use the example of textiles, but actually we have this in place now, covering a range of product categories, including packaging, and Chris is going to talk a lot more about packaging in a moment. And fundamentally what we're doing is building on that polluter pays principle. We're internalizing more of the full life cycle cost of the product, but we're doing something different as well, in that we're using that to fund the responsible management of those products at the end of life, and to incentivize producers to change how they do things, including design for recyclability and potentially shifting business models substantially. And so just to outline how this kind of mandatory system works, I'm using this textiles example, but the same principles apply to all product categories now in Europe. So essentially you have producers funding a collective scheme, and that funding is based on the products they place on the market. But we now have this mandatory component of what's called eco-modulation. So essentially, it's not just the tons that you place on the market that regulates what you contribute in terms of fees. It's also the nature of that stuff relative to other stuff that your competitors potentially are placing on the market. So effectively, you're paying a disproportionately higher fee if you're placing less recyclable plastic on the market, for instance, versus, you know, monomaterial, much more straightforward to recycle plastic. And that's a big step for EPR in Europe. And then that kind of differential of those modulated fees is affecting the way that those costs get distributed between producers, but it's not affecting the principle that all of the costs of whatever the scope of the scheme is are being covered. And the minimum in Europe, I'll explain in a moment, but essentially, obviously what's happening is that those costs are being passed on to consumers, as Chris was just explaining. So you're actually extending that responsibility and incentive to the point of consumption. And then obviously at the end of life, you have the EPR fees funding the cost of, as a minimum in the EU, cost of waste collection and sorting, and the recycling processes themselves, with ideally the outputs of that recycling activity feeding back into as secondary raw materials into the producers in their production of the next cycle of products.
Thanks, Joe. So, as Joe's already touched on, EPR, it respects the polluter pays principle, and producers, consumers are effectively two sides of the same coin. A real advantage of EPR...
I just saw that Commissioner Valle had a question, and I just want to make sure he can ask it. It might be related to what was just discussed.
Just very quickly, are the recycling, all of those different elements, collection and so forth, are those privately run companies, or are they municipal companies?
I mean, that hugely varies. And in some countries in Europe, it's a very deregulated market. In some, it's much more public sector dominated. But essentially, the EPR framework is designed to work in any of those situations. We have some quite strong ideas around how the EPR scheme should be designed, and Chris is going to talk a bit more about that now, but they ought to work in a very similar way, whether the services, the recycling services, are undertaken by the public or private sector.
Yeah, and I could speak to that, Richard. When I was in Europe and Belgium, I saw that the producer responsibility scheme FOSS+ for packaging was paying the haulers, whether it was municipal or the private sector haulers, more per ton the cleaner the material was. So it gave them extra money to help educate the public and keep the streams clean or upgrade the color of the bins or whatever it was. And they were finding that to work well with either. It didn't matter who was, if it's private or public.
And I mean, essentially, one of the things these systems need to do is to, I'll quickly go back to the last diagram, but essentially you've got the collection of fees from producers with the right incentives applied through the modulation of those fees. And then you've got the distribution of those fees to those that need to be funded to successfully manage whatever the impacts are that are within the scope of the scheme, whoever that is, whether it's public or private sector.
Can I just follow up with a quick comment and question? Are we talking about something in the future or what the UK has now? Because I track UK export plastic waste and y'all are flooding Turkey. So that little pretty recycling thing down there, that for plastic, most of the UK's plastic is exported, always has been. It's going to Turkey now. So that doesn't exist in the UK for very much plastic at all. So again, are we talking about something you're promoting in the future, or is this something you think the UK has now?
Sadly, we're not talking about the UK anymore. Following Brexit, none of this framework applies exactly in the UK. Actually, the UK will implement something along these lines over the next 3 years, in theory, based on sort of previous commitments. But this is the mandatory system across the 27 countries in the European Union. And right now it's at different levels of maturity in different countries. So in some places it's a long way away from this, in some places it's quite close.
Right, and I think that's what I was going to say is by country, it's not all at the same pace and they're not all doing exactly the same thing. They have a framework. They all seem to be operating a little differently. And so the exportation of plastics, I think, can be dealt with in EPR or any real scheme, but sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. So
yeah,
I think
like Germany, if we're talking about Germany claims to recycle 39% of their plastics, but 20% of the 39, more than half, is exported to non-OECD countries. So let's keep all of that in mind just when we look at this in the pretty little recycle building there.
And real quickly, Commissioner Osigura, and then we're going to let them finish the presentation. We'll take questions at the end.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple comments. I think is, in terms of following up on what Commissioner Dell mentioned, obviously, in the models that were presented, incineration played a big portion. We don't have incineration in California, as a broad public policy item. In terms of pay-as-you-throw system, the encouragement of moving to less materials, as it was explained, in terms of consumers versus citizens. However, we have seen, throughout California, depending on cities, that the pay-as-you-throw system, as they move to smaller MSW containers, what has happened is contamination either into the blue container, the recycling container, or the green container. And so I'd like to understand how that was resolved. And I also want to make sure that, once again, following up on Commissioner Dell's comments, that we don't use terms or present things that, seem to be a panacea, a resolution for everything, because I just want to, make a statement. I think the solid waste and recycling industry in California has done a wonderful job in making investments in the hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of collection systems and infrastructure. That's working very well. I do believe that there's always, room for improvement, and that comes in terms of augmentation or improvement of the system. For the system, I want to make sure that it seems sometimes that the conversation is that the system in California is not working well, when the industry, both the collection, recycling, and processing, has done, I think, a great job. And so, once again, I just want to make sure that, we don't show charts, to Commissioner Dell's comment, that paint a certain picture that might not be quite real.
So we're going to continue, if it's okay, to finish what we want to present, and we've got plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. And so I think it probably makes more sense for people to record their questions, and we can pick them up at the end, because some of this will be addressed as we go along. And issues around export we can certainly discuss further. And just to be clear, we're not in any way making any comparison here with California or commenting on California at all. It's really just hopefully bringing some interesting perspectives from outside.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So yes, I think one of the benefits of EPR for packaging is that it can more directly influence the change in design of the packaging material. Pay-as-you-throw really is a sort of second best instrument in that regard. It's a fairly blunt stick. So actually having the incentive at the design stage is a real strength of EPR, particularly when you start to go down the fee modulation route. I think another important point is that with the system that Joe's, it's just the diagram there that Joe's presented, producers are better placed to deal with the recycling market price fluctuations. If you're going to get a lower value for the recyclate from your packaging, it's likely that the material costs for your packaging are going to move in step with that. So producers are actually a lot better placed to deal with the price risk than are others, like public authorities. Okay, next slide, please, Joe. So in terms of factors to consider for EPR, firstly, the question of who is obligated. In our recent work for the Commission on developing guidance, we've looked at the cases where people exempt some of the smaller producers. I think in principle, you want to involve all producers. It means you get better data. It means you avoid free riding. But there are ways of making it easier for smaller producers to register and pay what's needed. The scope of costs to be covered is a really interesting one. Typically, or traditionally, it's just been the collection and recycling costs, so the costs of collection, sorting and other treatment to meet the recycling targets. There's a wider question of should you include the packaging that's in the residual waste stream as well, or should that be publicly funded? I think there's a strong argument for saying that those costs should be covered by producers as well. A recent change that has been spearheaded by the Single-Use Plastics Directive is the concept, not just the concept, but the reality of producers now having to pay for certain plastic items to have to pay for the costs of litter prevention and cleanup. Now that's quite a significant shift. Awareness raising and communication is also something that is required under the Single-Use Plastics Directive for certain items, and it's obviously a very relevant area for wider EPR. The setting of performance targets and how how the producers, how you check that the producers are meeting both those recycling targets, and in the case of litter, you need a cleanliness standard. You need some way of checking that the litter cleanup has taken place. I think one thing just to mention in the European context that has changed in terms of recycling, and it speaks to the point about export, is the point at where something is determined to have been recycled has changed in legislation from that which is collected and sent off for being recycled to effectively the pellets, the granules of recycled material that is ready to be put into a new product. So that's going to lower the recycling rates, but it's going to mean that we're actually reporting what is recycled. So next slide, please, Joe. So yeah, just to highlight, we finished a fairly significant study for the Commission last year on developing recommendations for guidance for the minimum requirements for EPR schemes. The Waste Framework Directive introduced a new article, Article 8A, setting minimum requirements in order to raise the standard across all member states and increase the harmonisation, the consistency among what EPR schemes cover. So this was related to aspects such as making sure that smaller producers wouldn't be treated unfairly or disproportionately in terms of the costs they face. Making sure the question about the different approaches to collection, is it publicly operated, is it privately run?
Chris,
there's a whole section there on how to ensure. Sorry?
I'm sorry, we're running a little over on time, so I just want to make sure we wrap this up so the commissioners.
Yeah, fine, but there's, I think, a useful element there on how to ensure that the producers are not paying any more than they need to pay under a cost-effective service. So mechanisms for making sure the producers are getting what they pay for and good value. Next slide, please, Joe. And in terms of recyclability, EPR can't do everything. It's not necessarily the right tool for waste prevention. In this guidance, we looked at what is the most appropriate criteria for varying of fees for fee modulation, and we determined that it's actually recyclability and the recycling rate, and the modulation of fees is used as a tool for the EPR schemes to meet the recycling targets in the most cost-effective way possible. In the short term, this can be done through reference to design for recyclability guidance. Longer term, as data improves, you could modulate the fees based on the actual recycling rates of different formats. Next slide, please, Joe.
Looking at the same animation in the right places here.
Yeah, we're going to have to really speed this up because we're running into the time frame. We were going to move on to another item.
Okay. Okay. Just to quickly mention that for things that you can't deal with through EPR, for certain items you really want to reduce consumption of. The Single-Use Plastics Directive has got bans for certain items and consumption reduction targets for others, and also the litter cost coverage highlighted in the third box down below. This final slide is the next one, I think, Joe. Just a point. Yeah, fine. Okay, so there we go. Go to the summary.
So essentially, just to wrap up, in terms of the kind of ideal broad package of measures, and yeah, this is somewhat idealistic. It's not politically practical to see this happening in Europe in the short term, but we're doing some of all of this already. So ban the things you know you don't want or need in the economy. You can't send a clearer signal to the economy than that. And we, as Chris mentioned, we've done that with a number of single-use plastic items, for example. Tax primary and secondary raw materials, but with differentials to reflect the reduced externalities from secondary materials. Introduce full cost coverage EPR with modulation of fees, and then use other economic instruments, so things like charges and deposits to incentivize behavior change, and that's with consumers and businesses. And that's us.
Great.
Finished.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to rush, but we did have 10:35 as our time on this, and we were going to take a 10-minute break. We might have to shorten it, unfortunately, to 5 minutes because we've got another presenter that I know Commissioner Sky would like to introduce, which is Julia Levin on the next item. And we're definitely not going to have enough time to probably get to all the questions. So you basically outlined 4 different financial mechanisms to drive behavior: taxes, charges, EPR, there was one other one at the beginning there. But so I guess at this point, I'll just turn it over to Commissioner Potashnick real quick, since this was your item. Did you at least get the taxes and issues discussed that you had?
Yeah, no, I think this was helpful. And if you could you speak a little bit more on, across all 4 items, given what Commissioner Oseguera said around waste to energy is not on the table here in California, and the fact that we don't have a clear pathway yet to advanced recycling. What we're finding, and I imagine it's the same in Europe, is flexible film packaging is the problem, or the majority of our problems right now in terms of what's in our waste stream. How have any of these 4 levers really influenced a move either away from flexible film packaging or created recycling opportunities for flexible film packaging outside of, again, waste to energy or advanced recycling?
I mean, I think on waste to energy, we don't have, to be honest, in the long term, building waste to energy capability right now doesn't feel like the right kind of investment to be making anyway. So, that's not something we're advocating as part of the recipe where it doesn't exist already. What we're seeing already in Europe in terms of the impact of modulation of EPR fees is quite a significant influence on design behavior of packaging producers. And this is relatively early days, but we're certainly seeing everything from shift to more monomaterials, to more investment in sourcing capacity for both 2D and for smaller size items. And then, as Chris mentioned, this shift in the calculation point for recycling is really driving the need for verifiable recycling, which you are simply not going to get from most non-OECD countries. And so, I don't think we're at the point now where the investment case is there to solve all of these problems from an infrastructure bankability point of view. But we're moving pretty rapidly to that situation, and we're certainly seeing massive interest because we've got this quite visible capacity gap driven by some much clearer regulation now. We're seeing huge interest from investors in developing all kinds of plastic recycling infrastructure.
But just to clarify, on flexible plastic, are you seeing a reduction in that growth? Because we're not seeing that here in the United States. We're seeing quite the opposite, a huge level of growth in plastic packaging for film.
We're seeing, obviously COVID isn't the easiest time to kind of really get these trends clear in the very short term. But we're definitely seeing significant switching behavior. Some of that is switching away from plastic altogether. And there are all sorts of potential consequences, good and bad consequences from that. And we are seeing some shift towards rigid, where previously we might have been looking at flexible. And we're certainly seeing more of a shift towards monomaterial and less, more recyclable formats of flexible. And that's before we've really got the full impact of this modulation of fees in place. So if that modulation is significant, then that will magnify that effect considerably.
Thanks.
Okay. I think we're unfortunately at time, and we're already going to cut 5 minutes out of our quick break here. I would urge everybody that we made sure that their contact information is on the last slide, so you can reach out and ask any questions that you might have to Joe and to Chris and to Sarah. We greatly appreciate them providing their precious time from their company to present this to us and give us a sense of what's going on in these areas of using market drivers. And I know that this also informs Commissioner Ward and I in our discussion about the financing and whether we're donut, economic policy, circular economy, whatever we want to call it, but we got to get to the root issue of how this imbalance has gotten to the point where it's a lot more expensive to recycle than it is to, throw it in a landfill or dispose of it, and then we lose the materials for good, and we have all kinds of externalized costs. So thank you very, very much for your time. We really appreciate it, and I would encourage also any of the committee chairs that wanted to invite them back to speak more in depth at your committees on certain issues to invite them back there, or we can discuss inviting them back for specific discussions if you wish. With that, we'll take a very quick, it looks like down to 4-minute break, and we'll come back and quickly introduce Julia Levin, our next presenter. And thank you again so much to our colleagues at Eunomia. We'll see you in a couple minutes. Okay. All right, if everyone could come back. Sorry that was so short. Okay, welcome back. There's Julia. Hi, Julia.
Hi there.
All right, so our next agenda item, number 6, is 45 minutes we set aside for a presentation and discussion regarding advanced recycling. This is to follow up on our last commission meeting where we tried to squeeze things into 2 hours and it didn't work, but we have a lot of discussion I think that the commissioners wanted to have and maybe ask questions of the presenters who are both back with us. So you can turn your camera on. That was John Timbers with Amnesty and the gentleman from Gaia who, sorry, I can't remember his name right now. It'll come back to me. But they're both on the line, I believe, and they'll be available to answer comments. So we can go ahead, and I'm going to turn it over for just a minute to Commissioner Sky because he wanted to introduce the guest he had asked we invite at the last meeting, Miss Julia Levin, to discuss from the Bioenergy Association of California. So I think we'll start with that presentation, and then we'll move into open discussion on all these issues. Commissioner Sky?
Thank you so much, Chair Sanborn. So I'm really pleased to be introducing Julia Levin. She's the Executive Director of the Bioenergy Association of California. They represent over 60 public agencies, local governments, and private companies that work to promote sustainable bioenergy development in California. But Julia has an incredible career. She started off as a global warming director for the National Audubon Society, then became the California Policy Coordinator for the Union of Concerned Scientists. She led campaigns to pass California's first renewable portfolio standard legislation and to establish the California Climate Action Reserve. And then she served as a Deputy Secretary for Climate Change and Energy at the California Resources Agency, where she chaired the governor's interagency bioenergy working group and led to the development of California's 2012 Bioenergy Action Plan. She also served as a commissioner for the California Energy Commission, where she was the presiding commissioner on renewable energy and associate commissioner on energy efficiency. So essentially, Julia really knows her stuff. She's been a foremost climate warrior in California. I'm really proud to know and work with her. And I asked that we invite Julia to present today because she has an excellent understanding of the challenges that we're facing in relation to infrastructure development in California, specifically relating to new and advanced technologies for processing organic waste. And one of our charges on the commission is to address how the state will reach the 75% goal for organic waste diversion. That's part of Senate Bill 1383, and understanding the barriers to developing new infrastructure is a critical blockade in our ability to meet that goal. So I'm really pleased to have Julia talk about what are the policies that we should be considering and recommending to the state to help us to overcome those barriers and improve processing capacity. So with that, I want to turn it over to Julia.
Thank you very much, Kobe. And can you all hear me and see my slides on the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to all of you commissioners and others. You are doing such important work here. This is absolutely critical for California to meet its climate change and air quality and clean energy goals. So I really appreciate the work that all of you are doing. I wanted to focus on a couple of areas related to bioenergy and compost and biochar production, which are really important co-products, and I really consider them all going together. First and foremost, as Kobe said, I've worked on climate change now for about 25 years, and climate change is by far the biggest reason why we need to convert organic waste to energy and compost and biochar. But there are a lot of other benefits as well that I want to touch on really briefly, and then talk about some of the barriers and some of the policy solutions. that we need to move quickly to implement the requirements of SB 1383 and beyond. So what got me involved in bioenergy in the first place is climate change, and I think it is still the most important reason why we need to focus much more on organic waste conversion to energy and compost and biochar. About 2 years ago, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, said that we have 12 years left to dramatically reduce climate pollution, or we will face catastrophic climate changes globally. That was about 2 years ago, which means we only have 10 years left. So 2030 really is a critical must succeed by date. The challenge is there are only two things that will make any difference in 10 years. And unfortunately, fossil fuel reduction, CO2 reduction isn't one of them. And the only two things that can make a difference in that short a time frame are reducing short-lived climate pollutants, primarily methane and black carbon, and sequestering carbon in the ground. And bioenergy with compost or biochar production can do both of those. So this is a slide that I stole from Professor Ramanathan, who's a climatologist at UC San Diego. He gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago about why short-lived climate pollutant reduction is so urgent. And I think many of us know this intuitively, but I really want to underscore this because climate change is an existential threat. We cannot overstate how serious and how catastrophic a threat it is. And I think we have to approach it like we would a war for our survival. And when you are at war, you have to prioritize the most urgent and the most important actions. And short-lived climate pollutant reductions is priority number one when we're dealing with climate change. The graph on the right, which is, again, I stole from Professor Ramanathan, really shows quite well why. So the goal of climate scientists is to keep warming below 2 degrees centigrade. If we focus only on carbon dioxide reductions, it doesn't do anything until 2050 or later because it takes decades for carbon dioxide reductions to benefit the climate. We don't have decades, so we've got to focus more on short-lived climate pollutants, which actually can begin to bend the warming curve right away. And the only way we even get to our mid-century goals is to do both short-lived climate pollutants and CO2 reduction. So it is really, really critical. In fact, it is essential to achieve our climate goals. What does this have to do with organic waste and recycling? Well, by far the largest sources of short-lived climate pollutants in California, both methane and black carbon, the largest sources come back to organic waste. Whether it's burning agricultural or forest waste or landfilling urban organic waste, landfills, dairies, and wastewater treatment facilities are the biggest sources of methane by far. And methane is 72 times more damaging to the climate than carbon dioxide. So we have to get at methane reductions as quickly as possible. And dealing with organic waste is the way that we do that. One of the other benefits of converting organic waste to energy is that it can provide carbon negative fuels. In fact, the lowest carbon energy of any source on Earth is energy produced from organic waste that would otherwise go to a landfill or be open burned or be left in piles to rot, which still releases methane. If you look at this chart, this is the life cycle carbon intensity of various energy sources. The two lowest carbon are biogas from diverted organic waste and dairy biogas. Carbon negative fuels are critical to achieve our mid-century goal of carbon neutrality. This slide is stolen, and I steal liberally, just to warn you all. This slide was stolen from Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which released a groundbreaking and actually really encouraging report about climate change last January of 2020. The report explored whether or not we could achieve carbon neutrality by mid-century, and very encouragingly found that we absolutely can with existing technologies, and that is surprisingly low cost. But that a lot of our current emissions can't be eliminated. And so the way that we offset those is by doing a lot more to achieve carbon negative emissions. And by far the biggest opportunity, more than 2/3 of all the carbon negative emissions we can achieve in California would come from waste biomass conversion to energy with carbon capture and storage. And that's because, as you saw on the previous slide, you're reducing methane or black carbon emissions upstream and displacing fossil fuels downstream. And if you produce compost and biochar as well, then you're also getting a benefit of carbon sequestration and displacing fossil fuel-based fertilizers. So it's really a triple win for the climate. So given how urgent it is to reduce short-lived climate pollutants and the opportunity for carbon negative emissions, not surprisingly, the state is putting a lot of emphasis on short-lived climate pollutant reductions in our overall climate strategy. This slide is taken from the current climate change scoping plan. And the Air Resources Board is relying on short-lived climate pollutant reduction for more than a third of all the carbon reductions we need to achieve by 2030. Every single one of the state's climate change plans calls for conversion of organic waste to energy and organic soil amendments. From the climate change scoping plan, the short-lived climate pollutant strategy, the forest carbon plan, the national working lands plan, they all call for beneficial reuse of organic waste. One of the other benefits of organic waste to energy and soil amendments is that it is very, very cost effective. This is a chart taken from a report from the Legislative Analyst Office a couple of years ago that showed that of all of the state's climate change investments, by far the most cost-effective investments are the ones in organic waste, both municipal organic waste as well as forest waste and dairy waste. And again, it's because those are the projects that are reducing the most damaging climate pollutants. One of the other benefits of dealing with organic waste is every community generates organic waste, whether it's municipal waste in LA County, agricultural waste in the San Joaquin Valley, forest waste in Northern and Eastern California. Every community generates local organic waste that can be used for local energy security. A lot of people ask, how much organic waste do we produce? Is it enough really to make a difference? If you put all of California's organic waste together, it's enough to provide about 20% of our electricity or our gas needs in California. And that is a lot of energy value. Even just looking at municipal solid waste, and that's the last blue line and the first green line, that is a really significant amount of energy that can be produced from that waste. And I want to explain the difference between the blue rows and the green rows. 80% of California's organic waste is cellulosic waste, meaning woody waste, nutshells, hard and generally dry material that is not digestible, meaning it's not suitable for anaerobic digestion or compost, that can be converted to energy and soil amendments through gasification or pyrolysis. And so we really need to focus just as much, if not more, on gasification and pyrolysis as anaerobic digestion and compost, because that's how we get to the really big organic waste numbers. I think you're all very, very familiar with SB 1383, but I just want to underscore that for the organic waste diversion requirements, there are only a handful of alternatives allowed. 3 of them relate back to energy, transportation fuels, electricity, and heating, and the other 2 are compost and mulch. But we get the biggest bang for the buck, by far the biggest greenhouse gas reductions, if we do both energy and soil amendments with our organic waste. When it comes to the wet waste, the digestible waste, the science is really, really clear that we maximize benefits by converting it to energy and compost, not just one or the other. The same is true with waste biomass. If we convert it to energy and biochar, we maximize the greenhouse gas reductions and other benefits. So we really need to be incentivizing projects that do both energy and beneficial co-products like organic soil amendments. I want to spend just a minute on non-combustion conversion, because it was interesting even in some of the previous presentations, the assumption that bioenergy means combustion or incineration. And I think that is less and less true, particularly in California, where most of the new projects in development are using non-combustion conversion technologies. So in the case of wet waste, food waste, it's generally anaerobic digestion. In the case of biomass waste, it's gasification and pyrolysis. And there are a lot of advantages to non-combustion advanced technology conversion. Above all, it's much cleaner, less polluting. It's also more efficient, so you get more energy and other beneficial products out of the same material. But also advanced technology conversion converts organic waste into renewable gas. And that's really critical because even if you combust that renewable gas, it's a lot less polluting and more efficient than directly combusting the waste. But even better will be using renewable gas in a fuel cell or linear generator or other non-combustion generation technologies, and then you virtually eliminate emissions every step of the way. Renewable gas can also be stored, so it can provide long duration energy storage. It can replace diesel and backup generators and heavy duty trucks. And it can produce biochar or compost as very beneficial co-products. Finally, in the case of non-combustion biomass conversion, if you're using gasification or pyrolysis, they operate at such high temperatures that they almost certainly destroy PFAS chemicals, which is a huge issue in California and elsewhere, because those are very, very toxic, damaging chemicals that we need to get out of the soil, out of our food supply, and gasification and pyrolysis can help do that. So just one really great example in California is on Fort Hunter Liggett, an Army base in Monterey County. The Army has both zero net waste and zero net energy goals, and they have figured out that they can accomplish both by gasifying the waste on base and converting it to electricity and fuels. And they are now starting to do that at foreign bases, which protects our troops, who are really vulnerable both to convoys that have to remove the waste from bases and that have to deliver the fuels. So again, double or triple win for these projects. The last slide. I want to talk about some of the policy changes and funding needs to really accelerate the development of bioenergy and beneficial co-products like compost or biochar. I think you all know in the urban waste sector, we need billions of dollars, and that is billions with a B. We need 100 new facilities, according to CalRecycle, to deal with our organic waste and convert it to energy and compost or biochar. It doesn't seem like we're going to get that money from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund or cap and trade revenues. So I think it's really clear we are going to need either a statewide bond or a statewide tax or both to help fund the development of these new facilities at the pace that we need them to be developed. We really do need to prioritize any incentives for the projects that are providing the biggest greenhouse gas reductions and other benefits, which means we need to incentivize projects that do both energy and soil amendments or other byproducts, co-products. In the electricity sector, several bills have been introduced or are going to be introduced this week that would help move the industry along. AB 322 by Assemblyman Salas would allocate 20% of the Energy Commission's Clean Energy Funding Program, R&D program, to biomass conversion. Assemblymember Aguiar Curry is going to introduce two bills this week, one that Commissioner Lapis and I have worked on a lot, that will require the state to develop a strategic implementation plan for organic waste across all sectors, and the other will allow community choice aggregators to participate in the state's small-scale bioenergy program. We also need to reward carbon-negative electricity projects, just as we do carbon-negative fuels projects. Right now, there's no added value to developers who produce carbon-negative power under the state's renewable portfolio standard, and that makes no sense. When diverted organic waste projects can provide 2 or 3 times the carbon reductions that solar or wind provide, they should be rewarded for those carbon-negative emissions. In the transportation sector, we have got to continue to incentivize near zero emission trucks that can run on carbon-negative biogas. There are a lot of great projects now in California. The CR&R project in Riverside County, the Energia project in San Bernardino County, South San Francisco, Altamont Pass, the Waste Management Project. They're converting biogas into carbon-negative transportation fuels or very low carbon transportation fuels. And those fuels are being used to replace diesel, which is one of the biggest sources of air pollution in California. That won't happen, though, if we don't incentivize low-emission garbage trucks and other vehicles that can run on carbon-negative biogas. So one of the things I would ask the Commission to do is please weigh in with the Air Board and the Energy Commission and ask them to continue to fund or to incentivize low-emission natural gas trucks that can run on biogas generated from diverted organic waste. Last but not least, we really need a renewable gas policy in California, just as we have a renewable electricity policy, either a requirement for utilities to procure renewable gas or a renewable gas standard like we have on the electricity side. And that, as much as anything, will help move the market forward. I know that's a lot. I'm happy to take questions, comments, disagreement, and thank you again for inviting me to speak this morning.
Okay, thank you very much. And I do want to go ahead and I think we had a public comment that was in the Ben, did you have a public comment that would needed to be read into the record?
Yes, let me pull it up. It's related to polypropylene. It's from Randy Pollock. The last issue of Resource Recycling stated the national average price of post-consumer polypropylene saw a major jump over the last month. The grade is now trading at 18.44 cents per pound compared with 11.69 cents in January. Last July, recycled polypropylene was at a low of 3.69 per pound. We need to continue to encourage markets and not ban them. And that's it.
Okay, so that's regarding the discussion we had in the previous agenda item. Thank you very much.
That's right. Yep.
Thank you. So I think we've got a comment from Commissioner Potashner.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Julia. And you mentioned this issue a little bit when it comes to CARB on the waste sector. You know, we are looking at the next round of regulations that are going to move our fleets to basically electric with the Advanced Clean Trucks Advanced Clean Trucks rule, and you know that has been historically a end market for our biogas if we're going to generate it on site. That looks to probably be going away. Have you looked at what additional infrastructure our sector would have to put into place to basically move that biogas into the electricity grid? Because that seems to be the only option we're going to have as a sector going forward after this new rule goes into place.
Well, you may be right, but I'd like to push back on that and ask all of you to help, because there isn't an electric 18-wheeler that can carry a full payload and go up and down the San Joaquin Valley or cross over the Sierra Nevada mountains. And so as soon as there is a commercially viable zero emission option, I'll stop asking for incentives for near zero emission trucks. But right now, the only alternative to near zero emission is diesel. And diesel trucks are the largest source of air pollution in the San Joaquin Valley and the South Coast Air District, the two dirtiest air districts in the entire United States. So to me, and to most vehicle experts, they don't see electric heavy-duty trucks being available or commercially viable, meeting fleet's needs for a decade or more. And I think the administration knows that, which is why Governor Newsom's executive order on zero-emission vehicles didn't call for anything in the heavy-duty sector until 2045.
Yeah, and so I get that. I'm sorry.
It's unconscionable to keep buying new diesel trucks. So I don't want to give up on the need for incentives for near zero emission natural gas trucks that can run on biogas. Having said that, I think the premise of your question is correct, that the state is trying to electrify everything as quickly as possible. And so we are trying to move the bioenergy industry in that direction without giving up on the need to replace diesel trucks. A lot of the infrastructure is the same. The conversion technology, building the actual bioenergy projects is the same. Either you need anaerobic digestion to convert food waste and yard waste, or gasification or pyrolysis to deal with biomass waste, woody waste going to landfills. All of that infrastructure is the same. The only thing that changes is whether you have vehicle fueling infrastructure on site, you put the biogas in a pipeline, or you produce electricity on site and use it on site, or send it to the transmission grid. But really the biggest cost of these projects is the conversion technology, and that you need whether you're producing electricity or vehicle fuel. So going back to the urgency of converting our organic waste to energy and other products, I'd say let's just get them built. And if 10 years from now we switch from vehicle fueling to electricity generation, that's a relatively small price to pay. The most urgent thing we need to do right now is just convert it to energy and not worry whether this is the long-term, the right form of energy so much as get it going now. So I hope that answers your question.
Sort of, yeah, thanks.
And my question, I guess, Julia, is hydrogen, because what happened to green hydrogen in all of this too? And it's another liquid fuel that we can produce from renewable energy but I guess that's not part of this discussion, but it's interesting to me as far as diesel replacement in trucks.
So I think hydrogen is a critical part of this discussion, and I do think hydrogen is probably the holy grail for bioenergy, because hydrogen can be stored, it can be converted to energy without any combustion, so there's virtually no emissions. It can provide dispatchable power, which we need to fill in around solar and wind. It has a lot of benefits. And that's actually the focus of AB 322, the bill by Assemblyman Salas that I mentioned that I hope many of you will support. It would allocate about $30 million of clean energy research, development, and deployment funding into proving that biomass conversion to hydrogen is feasible. We have some biogas anaerobic digestion projects that are producing biogas for hydrogen, but we've never done it in California with biomass conversion.
Okay,
It
we're gonna
makes
have to move
sense.
on.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, thanks. We're gonna have to move on pretty quickly because we've still got questions that are hanging over from the last commission meeting. So I'm gonna move on to Commissioner Valle.
Thank you, Julia. Quick question. Do you know of any technology or company that's working on what to do with a used Prius battery, Tesla battery, or at some point a used truck battery? And what do we do with those? And how do we dispose of those or reuse them?
I don't know of anyone that's working on that, and I think it's a really important question. I think there are a lot of environmental impacts of batteries, both the raw materials that go into batteries and then the end-of-life issues that California needs to address much more seriously, given how quickly we're expanding battery deployment. Having said that, it is not my area of expertise, but I think it is an important question.
Then, thank you, Commissioner Davis.
Julia, you had a slide that mentioned biochar, and I think you were in the context of carbon capture and storage. Is there some work? I haven't seen anything recently about biochar, but it, you know, in my mind, the capture always takes place when the tree grows. It doesn't take place again when you put it in the ground. Is there something about biochar or recent research on biochar that suggests there's additional sequestration beyond that initial carbon that grows in the tree?
So you can generate biochar not just from forest waste, but agricultural waste that would otherwise be open burned. And all that carbon would be going up in the atmosphere as black carbon, which is the single most damaging climate pollutant and really probably one of the most damaging air pollutants as well. So it's important to remember it's not just a byproduct of forest waste. And then there's all the wood waste going to landfills that can also be gasified or pyrolyzed and produce biochar as a co-product. But biochar is different from compost and other organic soil amendments because it is solid carbon. And so when you put it back in the soil, it's like charcoal. It stays there for a really long time. So if you want to look at some of the most current research, I would look at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab report that came out last January on carbon neutrality. There's a very long description of carbon sequestration and the difference between biochar, which lasts, 100 years or more and is considered permanent carbon sequestration compared to other soil amendments, which may provide, do provide water efficiency, nutrients, other benefits, but aren't necessarily permanent carbon sequestration. So there is a quantifiable difference. And that Lawrence Livermore National Lab report really provides a very good overview of the science on carbon sequestration in the ground.
Thanks.
And I just want to mention that Jonathan Timbers, I think you're on, and also Dr. Neil Tangri, who presented to us last week on this discussion on advanced technologies. If you could turn on your video, and anybody can ask them questions as well. This is all under the umbrella of advanced technologies. And so what I think Commissioner Sky was trying to show here is that some of the technologies that some might not like applied to the plastics are also used to be applied to the organics. And so if you throw out the technology because you don't like the one use of it, that it might actually hurt us in trying to deal with organics, if I sum that up correctly, Commissioner Sky. Okay, so we'll move on to Commissioner Ward real quickly because we're running out of time again.
Yeah, real quickly, I just wanted to raise 2 points. One is, again, reiterating short-term climate pollutants. The number 1 and 2 sources are dairy waste and enteric digestion. And I'm wondering if, first question is, does any of what you've said apply primarily to dairies and methane? As it seems to me there would be fewer locations and that might be easier, and there are larger quantities and larger sources of short-term greenhouse gas pollutants. And the second issue is in general my concern about large centralized facilities that then take a large portion of the waste stream is that's always a significant community investment. And history has shown that financing and building those facilities is much easier than actually maintaining them and running them over the long term in terms of viability for the communities that they're supposed to serve. And so I'm wondering if there's any difference in the kind of facilities you're talking about that might change that circumstance.
Those are good questions. So on dairies, I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but they are the single largest source of methane. Actually, dairy manure is the largest source. The dairy cows themselves are the second largest source, but landfills are the third. So landfills definitely do not get a pass when it comes to methane emissions. And it looks like some small number of the largest landfills are the worst by far. They are super methane polluters because of leakage issues. So landfills and diverted organic waste are really critical as well to reducing methane emissions. The second question, I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly what the
about large centralized facilities that in general, pyrolysis facilities, these other facilities, as far as I know, there aren't very small options. Am I incorrect on that?
Yeah, we are. There are a number of 3 megawatt and smaller biomass gasification facilities in development in California. For whatever reason, gasification, I think, is being deployed more widely at this point, or there are more gasification facilities than pyrolysis, but they're very similar in terms of the technology. We have probably about a dozen gasification facilities in development in California. They're almost all using forest waste or agricultural waste, not in the urban category. In terms of size, our view, the Bioenergy Association, and I think the state of California agrees, it has for the last decade, is new bioenergy and other organic waste facilities should be sized to fit the local organic waste supply. It doesn't make sense to truck heavy organic waste 100 miles or more, which is what some of the first generation large biomass combustion facilities require. They were overbuilt, actually, like a lot of wastewater facilities in California. And so they have to truck organic waste from long distances in diesel trucks. That doesn't make sense. But we don't advocate for a one size fits all either, because if you're in Los Angeles County, what is the appropriate size of facility is very different than if you're in Plumas or El Dorado County. So it is location specific, but I think the goal of using local organic waste locally for local energy security, local community resilience, that can apply everywhere, but the scale will be different in an urban community than a rural community.
Sorry, I was muted. Commissioner Schuyler, you think you're next?
Yeah, I'll be very brief because I think Julia gave such a great presentation and talked about the urgency of this. There are 2 points that I wanted to underscore. One is energy storage and the other is resiliency. So we have an existing natural gas grid that can be an incredible opportunity to create energy storage today. We're talking about developing large-scale battery systems for energy storage to even out the peaks, but why not use the existing system at much lower cost? And what's missing is the incentive for the large gas companies to transition to renewable supplies so that we can, instead of pulling more fossil gas, create a pull for all of this organic waste that is creating a huge problem in terms of short-lived climate pollutants. And the other is on resiliency. Electricity is certainly the future, but we have to address the fact that there are resiliency concerns. We saw that with the wildfires in California. We're seeing that right now in large parts of the center of the country, which are clearly unprepared for the impacts that a small amount of climate change is having today. Those impacts are just going to grow more significantly. Again, natural gas systems are more resilient to the types of issues that we're going to have more and more as climate change continues to have more impacts. But putting all of that aside, it's an incredibly cost-effective solution that we can implement today to buy us enough time to move towards the ultimate solutions. And even in terms of hydrogen, when we get the hydrogen economy going, the natural gas pipeline system is a way for us to ramp that up very quickly. You can inject an incredible volume of renewable hydrogen, whether it's created from excess renewable electricity or from bioenergy sources today. And we should absolutely be doing that. We don't do it because the policy incentives aren't there. And that's really why I wanted Julia to talk about the concrete recommendations that this commission should be considering.
So Commissioner Sky, are we going to be able to count on you to come up with some policy recommendations in this area since you seem to be the expert?
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to work on that.
Okay. Is there anybody else that wanted to work on a policy around this? Commissioner Sky, I'm happy to review them before you decide to bring them up, but thank you for all your effort.
I'm happy also to help Commissioner Scott with that.
Great. So we have Commissioner Osigura and Commissioner Sky going to work on some policies around this. So that's our second two-person. And I would say I'm going to quickly give the floor just 3 minutes each to our previous speakers, Mr. Timbers and Mr. Tangri, because I want them to kind of counterbalance the presentation Julia gave as far as the use of these technologies. Any thoughts you have that you'd like to share with the commissioners and the public about using the technologies for plastics versus organics, and any thoughts you have on that? And we can start with Mr. Timbers, and then we'll go to Dr. Nagri. Okay? I think we have 4 minutes each.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Sanborn. The main thing that jumped out at me is I got an education there, so I really appreciate that. I myself did not appreciate the similarities last week, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago when I spoke about pyrolysis. I didn't appreciate that there were other applications for the technology, and that was a great presentation. And I just see a lot of opportunities for those two applications of that pyrolysis and gasification technology to be symbiotic and work together, either through conversion of bio-waste or through conversion of, I guess we'll call plastics a non-bio waste. And so I guess that the thing I'd like to just point out are the similarities. You know, when we talk about advanced recycling for plastics, we were talking about pyrolysis and gasification. And the presentation we just saw, you know, those technologies are pyrolysis and gasification. And, you know, if I could leave the commission with one, you know, educational point there, it's just that those technologies are not incineration. They're not combustion. I don't want to say exciting technologies, but they're just a different space of technology. You know, from our perspective, we would just like to see in regulation those things separated, that pyrolysis and gasification are not treated like combustion from a regulatory standpoint, that they actually are regulated. You know, I think some of the laws that we've seen other states passing, just creating a new space within regulation for these types of technologies, recognizing that they're kind of bridge that gap between manufacturing and waste and don't really fit neatly into either bucket and need their own category for regulation. And then finally, that once they're you know, recognized as separate, once they're regulated separate, that they're also counted and accounted for separate from these combustion and incineration. So just if I get one thing out of my 4 minutes here, it's just that these are different. These are different technologies from combustion and regulation. And if we could just leave this with that one point being clarified, I'd be pretty happy with it. And I'll yield my time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And Dr. Tangri, did you want to speak to this? Darn
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't really prepared to, I didn't, you know, prepare a presentation or anything. I'll just pick up on a couple of points. One, I believe Commissioner Sky made a point about the importance of what you're treating in the technology, right? So there's sort of two components. There's the technology and there's the feedstock. And I'm very concerned about some of the loose language that gets used around bioenergy or renewable gas or biogas. You know, when you're talking about something that is purely agricultural waste or food waste going in, that's going to present a very different set of concerns and different emissions profile than if you're talking about solid waste or plastics, which is a much more heterogeneous material, contains lots of plasticizers. Ms. Levin was making the point that high temperatures can break down PFAS and other contaminants. The question, but of course, it doesn't transform the elements. So then the question is, where do those come out? Are they captured in the flue gas? Are they captured in a waste product? How do we then deal with those? They don't magically disappear. So there is a need, I think, to regulate all of the emissions and the solid and liquid wastes that come out of any of these processes very carefully. Monitor those. And I think that we need to distinguish between, what can be somewhat tricky carbon accounting with the sort of the biomass and what are the alternative uses or waste uses of the biomass versus the fossil fuel and other components of the waste stream. So I think so that point is basically, I think it's important to look not just at the technology, but also at what is being fed in. On the second point that these are fundamentally different technologies from combustion, I don't really agree. And the reason for that is that you get a gas out and eventually you burn the gas. So a combustion engineer will tell you that the first stage of any combustion is pyrolysis. Solids don't burn. When you put a log in your fireplace, the flame is actually is a fraction of a millimeter off of the log because what's happening there is pyrolysis. The hydrocarbons in the log are vaporizing and then they burn. And so what we call a pyrolysis or a gasification process takes that first step, captures the gas, and then does something with it. And that something usually involves eventually burning it. If you're going to get energy out of it, it has to burn. There's no question about that. Now you can argue that there's that it's a cleaner burn because of the step process, but it's still going to be a combustion. So as long as you have combustion in the mix, then I think it's fair to, it's not really appropriate to call these non-combustion technologies. This is the pyrolysis step is a preparatory step to combustion.
Can I respond to that, Heidi?
Yes, of course, but I just want to ask, is combustion the problem or is it the emissions that are the problem?
Well, you can't have combustion without emissions.
Right, but then it's also captured back end, yeah. Okay, Julia, did you want to close up after you've heard?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the plastics part, if you want to get credit under the state's renewable electricity law, you can only use organic waste with biomass conversion. So it will have to be separated, and any contaminants, plastics, other things in the waste will have to be absolutely de minimis in order for it to qualify under the RPS. So we only focus on the organic fraction of municipal solid waste. And so I think to your point, the state would agree that that's got to be the priority. From a climate standpoint, it's also infinitely higher priority to deal with organic waste right now, because that's what reduces short-lived climate pollutants. So I agree with your first point that we really need to focus and limit biomass conversion to the truly organic fraction. That is priority number one right now. Your second point, though, I disagree with, and more importantly, so does state law. Gasification and pyrolysis are classified as non-combustion conversion technologies under multiple state laws. And the reason is because you're correct that you need a spark to start it. But then it's all about heat. And it's about superheating the material and breaking it into two components, a gas, which is mostly hydrogen, and biochar. And so it is not considered in the scientific community or under state law to be combustion. Your last point I also disagree with. We are trying to move toward use of hydrogen, and the gas from gasification and pyrolysis is about half hydrogen. So it's actually a great basis for fuel cells and linear generators and other non-combustion technology. So it's no longer accurate. It may have been 10 years ago, but it is no longer accurate to say even gas has to be combusted. It doesn't. It can be broken into hydrogen and its other components. Hydrogen can be converted to energy with no combustion whatsoever. And we need to move in that direction. I think I agree with your premise, which is to move away from combustion as much as possible. Although even combustion has much lower greenhouse gas and air pollution emissions than just putting the waste in a landfill, or worse, burning it in the open, which is what we do with a lot of our ag and forest waste. So combustion is better than the alternatives, but I agree with you, we need to move away from combustion as quickly as possible. But again, that's not going to happen without state funding.
Okay, well, we're at 11:30 at our time, and we're losing a couple of our commissioners. So I'd just like to say thank you to all of you. This is a very educational. Oh, did somebody? Oh, was Commissioner Schneider? Do you have something quick? We're at time.
Really quick, sorry, my apologies. I think this goes to Ms. Levin. For the city of Millbrae, I liked your comment about where we need to put our economic development incentives. We are one of the cities that uses South City Scavenger for anaerobic digestion. We were also one of the first cities in the state to have anaerobic digestion for fogs. And it turns out that xylosines have destroyed our equipment. So we're going back out to bid for millions of dollars to replace that. And I was ready for this 2 weeks ago, Chair Sanborn, with the process within a sewage treatment plant. But our sewage treatment plants are likely sources for things, well, not just sewage sludge, but for fats, oils, and greases. The alternative in my area is that fogs are shipped out to the Central Valley for animal feed. I'm always a little worried about feeding chickens to chickens in a simple model. But so I really liked our plant, but millions of dollars to replace the equipment to be able to turn fat, oils, and greases into biogas to run our sewage treatment plant. So we're merging in with sewage treatment plants here, and that's a further discussion.
Thank you. And we're going to have a public comment. I just want to say, after thanking our speakers again, this probably isn't the end of this discussion. I would encourage the Organics Committee or others to take up certain, parts of this discussion and bring any policies you might like to the commission. But again, I do want to highlight one thing. When people engineer solutions, it's always going to be more expensive than using nature's solution. The way nature pulled carbon out of the atmosphere was through plants and put it in the soil. And I would encourage everybody to watch the movie Kiss the Ground, because it's a very important way that we can all pull carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back in the soils just by planting plants and not letting ground go fallow. And with that, we'll take a public comment, and then we'll have to end this discussion and move on to legislation.
We actually got two now. The first one is from Genevieve Abaddon. The Clean Seas Lobbying Coalition supports source reduction and reuse as true solutions to the plastic pollution crisis. We are not going to recycle our way out of it, no matter what form recycling takes, and no form of recycling is a replacement for reducing plastic production. The increasing surge in plastic use exacerbates health risks from production all the way through disposal, predominantly in communities of color and low-income communities. Rates of asthma and other respiratory illnesses are far greater in communities near oil refineries, plastic production facilities, highways used for shipping, and incinerators or landfills. Steps must be taken to protect the public health of these communities. In our opinion, advanced recycling is not a step in that direction. Advanced recycling is a false solution that doesn't take into consideration the entire life cycle of plastics. And the second one is from Gail Bryce at XT Green. The Eunomia presentation included the rapid escalation of landfill costs over a short period of time. Is this something that could be used in California, especially for materials like carpet that, one, have a recycling infrastructure that needs material, two, are part of a stewardship program, and three, create significant leachate treatment problems in landfills?
Well, that's from a previous item, but I can say, trying to add taxes in California has been a challenge to adding to the tipping fee alone, and I think everybody can on the commission knows that. So it's been tried, and it's a very difficult political path. Thank you all so very much. This was a really helpful discussion, and I encourage the commissioners to reach out individually to the speakers, get some ideas if there are things you want to have brought back. But again, we've got technologies are different than the feedstocks, so we've got to make sure we keep that in our mind as we make policy. And thank you so much again to the speakers. Dr. Tangri, Julia, Appreciate it so much. And to John. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item number 7, which is the update on legislation. And we had, I believe, Mindy from the Cal Recycle staff. Is she on? Give a discussion on this.
I'm on. I don't know if I'm Zoe again.
You are. You're Zoe.
I don't know what's going on.
We're going to have to get one of those faces, your face to put it. Okay, so yeah, great. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, so we've seen a couple more bills come in, and the deadline is on February 19th. So we should see all bills, probably in spot form for some of them, but all bills coming in this week. So we'll focus on the new bills. We can advance the slide there. Okay. So the new proposed bills since the last presentation include AB 478, which is by Assemblymember Ting, who carried the minimum content bill for bottle bill last year, 793, and this would be a minimum content bill for thermoforms. It is a spot bill, so we'll get more details as committees approach. SB 343, Allen, is a bill about labeling and recycling, recyclable, and being honest in those labels. And it would require CalRecycle to adopt regulations to determine the types of packaging that can be labeled recyclable. AB 504 is a bill that we have seen before. This was a follow-on to the McCarty bill a couple years ago, and I'm going to forget the number, but basically that bill required organic bins next to recycle bins. And in this case, amusement parks want an exemption from having to put them near carts, near like the churro carts you see at Disneyland when we were allowed to go to Disneyland, or when it was safe to go to Disneyland, I should say. But so they don't want to have to put the organic bins at every food cart, every food area. And we had no objection to this clarification of the original McCarty bill, but it has, we've seen it twice before, and it hasn't advanced more because of the session last year than anything else in COVID. Next slide. So there are 2 proposed trailer bill policies, and one is related to the proposal on 1383 and staffing for CalRecycle, and this would allow CalRecycle to monitor jurisdictions and visit every 4 years instead of the 2 to 4 year cycle that we're on now. And then the other one, sorry, can we go back one slide? No, back. Okay. And then, of course, the extension of the pilots as well, which we talked about. I think I did misspeak last time when I said it was $10 million total. It will be $10 million this time, $15 million total. That is the proposal. So I did want to clarify that on the pilot program. And there's a link to the trailer bill language if you'd like to take a look. These are the bills we've already chatted about, and so I'm not really going to go over them. If you do have any questions, go ahead and send me a note, and I can try to answer them. We've also heard, even on today's meeting, that there are several bills in the works, and there's a lot of interest in, again, packaging and organics. We're probably going to see a bill on 1383. So stay tuned, and we'll see what comes out on Friday.
Thanks. And I can say I've been talking with the legislator on possibly carrying the recommendation on the State Agency by Recycle campaign. That's with my NSAC hat on. So I'm excited about that. And then, so really we can look at a lot of the things that we've recommended from this commission. We're starting to see in legislation. We've seen AJR 4 on the Basel Convention. There is a sign-on letter going around about that for anybody who's interested. That'll be going in. I think they're hearing that at the beginning of March. We've got the Truth in Labeling bill and possibly State Agency by Recycled, and not giving diversion credit for exports of plastic. So that's looks like that's going to be introduced. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening, and again, I really want to thank the commissioners for working together. I think it does help the legislators to have consensus, and at least amongst us, to feel confident to carry some of this stuff. So we'll see Friday, by the end of the day Friday. So Minnie, maybe we should keep a list of the bills that we're watching from this commission. I know that the Bloom labeling of flushable wipes bill just went in, and I consider it kind of a labeling, truth in labeling bill as well, that they're not flushable, even though they're being called flushable, and it's becoming a epidemic of clogs in the system. I don't know if there's other bills people want to mention, and we can maybe have Mindy track those if you're interested. Okay.
Yeah, and we'll keep the running list here on the presentation. But again, if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out and we will try to be helpful.
Thank you. All right, and then if I can get a copy of the PowerPoints too, I guess they're posted on your CalRecycle page. If not, then I can post them on the Google Docs. So if Ben can send them over to me, I'll be happy to do that.
Sure.
Thank you, appreciate it.
No problem.
In future meetings, then the bills will have been introduced, and then we'll have to discuss if this commission, again, I'll have to go double check with Zoe about the authority we have to weigh in on these bills, or if it's all, I think we decided individually, but we should get back to that discussion, make sure we're clear on what we would like to do and what our authority is on that. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 8, review of the response to the commission report. This is probably the last time we'll put this on the agenda for now, but I know the chair and vice chair and I just wanted to have space because we have to have it agendized to discuss it in case we do hear back from legislators. I just can't tell you how many staffers and legislators have told me that they can't believe this commission produced this amount of work, that they found this useful. So I just want to thank you all again for the work because I keep hearing it over and over again. And I'm also hearing it from other parts of the country and other legislators, other even nonprofits that are talking about the commission's report and recommendations that apply to their state. So the other thing I wanted to bring up was that I was working with Commissioner Don Levy on a press release regarding we did get the bottle bill letter out after the last meeting, and it's posted. We sent it to all the legislators, CalRecycle, everybody, and there are letters coming in that are in support in concept, including there's a joint letter between the League, CSAC, and RCRC. That's posted as well, and I've got a separate folder in the Google Documents just for that letter that we sent and all the responses that we're seeing that are related or basically in support of those recommendations. So hopefully we'll see some movement on that. There's a lot of support for addressing the problems we're seeing with the collection side of the bottle bill and getting people their deposit money back when they need it the most. So unless there's something else you all wish to discuss under this item, we can just move on, and I won't put this on the agenda anymore because I don't think we need it. I think everybody said what they're going to say, and we'll just see it all in the bills. Okay, well then we'll just move on quickly for the next meeting. We had tried to go back to 2-hour meetings, and it didn't work for the meetings where we've got these presenters. We just don't leave enough time for a decent discussion for them to present and then for us to ask questions. So I think the next committee or commission meeting, we could go back to 2 hours because we don't have any planned speakers unless you all request that we have one. But I know that all of our time is precious, and we had heard that it was really hard, these 3- and 4-hour meetings. So I would propose for the next meeting, since I don't see us with this new speaker, we just let everybody really focus on developing their policy proposals and having a robust discussion about policy proposals, hopefully that come forward to the commission for this next report at the next meeting, and go back to a 9 to 11 meeting time, if that works for all of you. Is there anyone who does not wish that? And Commissioner Ward, I think you have a comment?
Well, I generally think it's better to overschedule the time that we might have the meeting and then cut it short. So I like the idea of scheduling for 3-hour meetings and then targeting for 2, if that's possible. But also regarding discussion of agenda items for future meetings, I really appreciated the Eunomia presentation, but it was obvious to me that they were focusing on new policies, and we're not looking in any way, or at least that was not part of the discussion, about existing tax structures and subsidies fostering resource extraction. And I just want to make sure that that doesn't entirely drop off the radar of things that we might be able to discuss, because it absolutely impacts the amount and quantity and types of materials that are pushed into our economy because they're incentivized. And we need to talk about those fundamental structural incentives if we're going to support secondary material markets. And yet that wasn't included in this discussion, and I still think it's an important part.
Is that not part of what you and I are working on with the policy proposal regarding the economics?
Well, good segue. Yes, and last meeting I had asked to work with to pass that along to commissioners, to the commissioners working on organ models, and they declined. And so what will happen, if possible, is I'll work with Chair Sanborn, and then this will move through the Market Development Committee. I'd like to be able to be part of that presentation because I started with it.
Okay, so you and I will work on that, and the sooner we work on that, we can really get this discussion to a head, because I think the ultimate market development issue we have is the fight against subsidized virgin extraction. And it's just not allowing us to be competitive in the final market with the recycled products. Is there anything else other commissioners would like to see on future agendas?
Just, just to follow up on that last comment, to the extent that you can focus on the impact on plastic pricing, since it is a byproduct of a heavily subsidized petroleum extraction, I think that would be, from my standpoint, would be really useful. We know that recycled plastic always competes with virgin pricing, and you can try to change demand, but that virgin pricing is, I think, a heavily subsidized component. And I can't say that I really can make that clear link, but to the extent that you could maybe try to tease that out of the research you're doing, I think it would be pretty beneficial.
Good point, John. I agree.
Yeah, it does apply across the board to materials. So, giving our forests away to harvesting of timber does, end up causing us problems with paper markets. Mining supports also, other types of metal and even battery recycling. So it goes across the board. And I guess the one thing as a volunteer commissioner I don't want to do is make this a research project getting down to the weeds too much, but to just say, in short, if we truly believe in a free market, we're not going to subsidize the virgin extraction and then say on the other side that we want recycling and we know it's better for the planet and it's more sustainable, because it doesn't work. Those things don't match. We have to be clear on our policies across the board.
I guess I was thinking that there may be some research that others have done, Center for Biological Diversity on mining and so forth. So, but if it's coming to market development, then we can open it up there and expand. So,
yep. Sounds good. Okay, well then that will be one of the items. It's really just I think the policy that both Commissioner Ward and I were going to develop and then take through the Market Development Committee. All right, so we'll move on to agenda item number 10, which is the meeting summary and closing. So in closing, what I heard today, we added two-person committees. One is Commissioner Davis and Sky working on, let's see, what were you working on? Davis and Sky finalizing, we were going to work on finalizing the meeting minutes. Sorry, that's for me to work with you guys on the meeting minutes. But we were going to have Osagura and Sky working on the renewable technology proposal. And we also had one on enforcement. And I'm trying to remember who the two commissioners were doing enforcement. I think it was
Dell and Lapis.
Okay. So those are the three things that I had coming out of this meeting. And then I guess we can wrap it up with a few minutes to go. And I'm sorry I didn't know that we would wrap it up this early, or else we would have had a few more minutes for discussion for previous speakers. But I think it was a great meeting, very educational, and I really appreciate all your time. So I would just ask everybody to really start putting pen to paper on writing the context for your committees, getting your policies drafted, and starting to work them through the system so we don't end up with a log jam at the very end before the July report. So with that, we'll close the meeting. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful couple of weeks, and we will see you March 3rd, and we'll schedule it for 3 hours and hopefully try to get it done in 2. Thank you, everybody.